The first time it happened, I remember the silence more than anything else. No words. No footsteps in the hallway. Just the thundering sound of my own heartbeat as I realized the line had already been crossed, and there was no going back. Her eyes lingered on mine for longer than they should have, and in that stolen glance, everything ordinary about my life shattered into something I couldn't control. But before I take you deeper into that moment, let me pause here. You are watching Midnight Confession. If this story already pulls you in, please remember to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapters. Trust me, you'll want to know how this unfolds. Now, let me start from the beginning. My name is Ethan Miller. I was 21 the summer I moved back to my father's hometown, a quiet corner of Montana where the mountains looked eternal, but everything else felt temporary. My parents had divorced years earlier. Mom stayed in Denver. Dad had kept his old house in Willow Creek, a town that barely had a main street. I hadn't planned on coming back. But life has a way of cornering you, especially when you're broke, half-lost, and carrying more regrets than you'd like to admit. Dad offered me a spare room, and I told myself it would only be for a while. The first night I arrived, I couldn't sleep. The walls of my childhood room felt smaller, like they'd shrunk over the years. Through the thin curtains, I saw the glow from the porch light next door. That's when I noticed her, the woman I would later try and fail to stay away from. She was standing outside, arms crossed against the cool night air, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked older than me, of course, but not by much. Something in the way she carried herself, poised yet weary, pulled my eyes to her and wouldn't let go. Her name was Claire Donovan. She lived alone, though people in town whispered about the husband who had left and never come back. At first, I told myself she was just a neighbor, nothing more. But even then, deep down, I knew better. The following days passed slowly, with chores around Dad's place, the creak of the wooden floors, and the heavy silence between me and a man I barely knew anymore. Yet somehow, every time I stepped outside, I'd see Claire, watering her garden, carrying groceries, or simply leaning against her porch railing as if waiting for something or someone. And each time, our eyes met a little longer. Each time, I felt the quiet stir of something I didn't dare name. What I didn't know then was how quickly small towns turn glances into rumors, and rumors into something far harder to escape. I kept telling myself it was harmless. Neighbors exchanged glances all the time. People smiled, waved, maybe traded a few words about the weather. That was normal. That was safe. But with Claire, it never felt safe. It felt like stepping too close to the edge of something that might swallow me whole. One afternoon, Dad asked me to fix the gutter on the side of the house. I climbed up the ladder with a hammer in my hand, the sun burning down, sweat dripping into my eyes. From that height, I had a clear view of her yard. She was kneeling in the garden, dirt on her knees, her hair tied back in a loose braid. She must have felt my eyes, because she looked up, and for a second too long, neither of us looked away. Later that evening, as I walked to the small town store, I caught up to her at the corner. She smiled, soft, almost reluctant. "Back in town for good?" she asked. I shrugged. "Just for the summer. Maybe longer. Depends." She nodded, like she understood more than I had said. "This place has a way of keeping people," she whispered. "Even the ones who swore they'd never come back." We talked as we walked toward Main Street. Nothing dramatic, just small-town chatter. The grocery store closing earlier these days, the diner's pie not being what it used to be. But under it all was a current, a pull I couldn't explain away. When we reached the store, I hesitated. She pushed the door open but turned back to me, her eyes holding mine. "Ethan," she said, my name tasting different on her lips. "You don't look like the boy who left here." That night, lying awake in bed, I kept hearing her voice. Not the words exactly, but the way she said them, like she had been watching, waiting, long before I returned. The town of Willow Creek was small. People noticed everything. And I started noticing how others looked at me when I lingered too long on my porch, waiting for her shadow to appear next door. I should have stopped it there. But, of course, I didn't. One night, after another awkward dinner with Dad, I stepped outside just to breathe. The air was cool, scented with pine and wood smoke. Claire was on her porch, a thin sweater pulled over her shoulders. Our eyes locked, and this time, she lifted her glass of wine slightly, like an unspoken invitation. I crossed the lawn without thinking. That was the first real step across the line. Her porch light cast a soft halo, turning the night into something quieter, more secretive. When I stepped closer, I could hear the faint clink of ice in her glass. Claire leaned against the railing, watching me like she already knew I would come. "You couldn't sleep either?" she asked. I shook my head, though the truth was, I hadn't even tried. Something heavier than restlessness had pulled me out of the house. She gestured toward the empty chair beside her. I sat down, close enough to catch the warmth of her body in the cool night air. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was loaded, heavy with things that didn't need to be said aloud. Finally, she broke it. "You look like him," she said softly. "Like who?" "Your father. When he was younger. The way he carried himself. The way people noticed when he walked into a room." I didn't know how to respond. Compliment? Warning? Her words left me unsteady, like I'd stepped onto thin ice. She swirled the last of her wine, eyes distant. "But you're not him. You never were." Then she glanced at me, sharp and searching. And I think that's what scares me. I opened my mouth, but nothing came. The night hummed with crickets, the kind of sound that filled every corner of silence. After a while, she stood, smoothing her sweater. "It's late," she murmured, but her eyes lingered on mine a moment too long. "You should go before someone sees." I wanted to argue to stay, to ask her what exactly she meant, but I didn't. Instead, I rose, nodded, and walked back across the grass, each step heavier than the last. Inside my house, I stood at the window, watching her silhouette move behind her curtains. My pulse hadn't slowed. That night, I realized something dangerous. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was need. And the way she looked at me told me she felt it too. The line between us, whatever it had been, was fading fast. The next morning, the world pretended nothing had happened. The sun rose bright, spilling over the quiet neighborhood. Kids rode bikes, sprinklers ticked across lawns. But inside me, everything had shifted. I caught myself glancing toward Claire's house more times than I wanted to admit. Her curtains were half open, letting sunlight cut across her living room. I imagined her moving through that light, barefoot, distracted, unaware that I was watching. When I finally saw her outside, she was kneeling by her rose bushes, trimming with small, careful movements. She looked peaceful, almost ordinary, and for a second I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. But then she looked up. Her eyes found mine across the hedge. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just held my gaze, long enough for something unspoken to pass between us, before turning back to her flowers. By evening, I told myself to let it go, to bury whatever was growing inside me. But the truth is, it was already too late. That night, I heard knocking. Not on my front door, but faint, deliberate, against the back patio glass. My heart leapt into my throat. When I pulled the curtain aside, Claire was standing there. Her sweater pulled tight around her, hair loose from the wind. I opened the door slowly. "Claire?" She stepped in without asking. "I didn't want anyone to see me at your front porch," she whispered. The air between us felt charged, restless, as if the room itself knew we were teetering on an edge. "I shouldn't be here," she said. But she didn't move. Neither did I. The only sound was her breathing, and mine uneven, too loud in the quiet. Her hand brushed the table as she steadied herself, but her eyes stayed on me, searching, daring me to say something, anything. I didn't. And in that silence, I realized the night was no longer ordinary. It had become a secret, one that belonged to the two of us alone. Claire didn't leave. She stood there in the dim light of my kitchen, sweater sleeves brushing her wrists, her eyes locked on mine like she was weighing a decision too heavy to carry alone. "I couldn't sleep," she finally said, her voice barely more than a breath. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing it, the way we looked at each other last night. It hasn't left me. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter. "Claire, you shouldn't." "I know," she cut in, sharp but trembling. I know I shouldn't. But knowing doesn't stop it, does it? For a moment, neither of us moved. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the crickets filled the silence. My pulse was a drum in my ears. She stepped closer, slow, hesitant, as if each inch was a confession in itself. "Tell me you haven't thought about it," she whispered. "Tell me I'm the only one losing my mind here." I should have said something sensible. Something safe. But the truth pressed against my chest like a secret begging to be set free. I admitted. Every second since last night. Her breath caught, and in that instant, the fragile space between us shattered. She reached for my hand. Just barely, her fingers brushing mine, but that tiny touch burned hotter than any fire. We froze there, caught between restraint and surrender, knowing that one more step would tip us past the point of no return. The weight of it was unbearable. Then, just as suddenly, Claire pulled her hand back, clutching it to her chest like she'd touched something forbidden. "I can't," she said, shaking her head. "Not yet. Not tonight." She turned toward the patio door, pausing only long enough to glance back at me with eyes that carried both apology and promise. And then she was gone, slipping into the night like a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. But I knew she would come back. The real question was when. The days that followed were heavier than any storm. Claire and I avoided each other, at least on the surface. She stuck to her routine. Morning coffee, evening walks, polite conversations across the fence. But underneath, everything had shifted. Every glance lingered too long. Every silence hummed with what we didn't dare say out loud. At night, I lay awake, replaying that moment in the kitchen. Her hand brushing mine, her eyes shining with the weight of something she couldn't suppress. It haunted me worse than any nightmare, because it wasn't just memory. It was promise. One evening, I was repairing the old swing on my porch when I heard footsteps crunching the gravel. I didn't even need to look up. I knew it was her. "Hi," she said softly, hugging her arms around herself. "I thought you might need help." Her excuse was paper thin, but I let her have it. "Sure," I answered, moving aside. She held the rope while I tied the knots, her face inches from mine. The smell of her perfume mixed with the cedar air, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. When I tugged the knot tight, my hand brushed hers. Neither of us pulled away. "You ever think," Claire whispered, "that life gives us moments we're not supposed to waste? Even if they don't make sense." Her words were dangerous, reckless. But in them, I heard the truth we'd both been circling. Every day, I admitted. She met my eyes then, and there was no mistaking it. She wasn't just testing boundaries anymore. She was inviting me closer. The swing creaked softly as if the night itself was holding its breath. But once again, just when the moment seemed too sharp to resist, Claire stepped back. Her hand slipped from the rope. Her lips parted as though she wanted to say something more, but didn't. Instead, she turned, her voice trembling. "I should go." And before I could stop her, she disappeared into the dark, leaving me on the porch with nothing but the echo of what almost happened. I tried to convince myself she was gone for good that night, that I could bury the temptation with the same knots I had tied on the porch swing. But the night doesn't forgive lies. Barely an hour after Claire left, I heard it, the faint crunch of gravel again. My chest tightened. I rose, half afraid, half certain of what I'd find. And there she was. Claire stood at the bottom of my porch steps, her breath uneven, hair loose around her face. She looked nothing like the polished woman the town adored. She looked raw, undone, like she'd run straight from her heart to my door. "I couldn't," she started, her voice breaking. "Micah, I couldn't just leave it like that." Her eyes glistened in the porch light, and for a long moment, we only stared at each other. The air between us was sharp, thick, dangerous. "Claire," my voice was hoarse, warning and pleading at once. But she shook her head, stepping closer. "Don't say it. Please. Just don't." And then she climbed the steps. Her hand trembled as it found mine, fingers curling desperately like she was holding on for air. I could feel her pulse, fast, unsteady, mirroring my own. "Do you know how long I've fought this?" she whispered. "How many nights I've lain awake, telling myself it's wrong, that I'm stronger than this. But tonight, I couldn't lie anymore. The confession hung in the air, heavier than the summer heat. I should have stopped her. I knew every reason why. But when her forehead leaned against my chest, when her body shook with a need she'd been suffocating for too long, my arms betrayed me. They wrapped around her as if they'd been waiting all my life. The porch swing creaked again, like an old witness to a secret being born. For the first time, I let my hand rest against her back, pulling her closer. And in that moment, nothing existed but the sound of her heartbeat against mine. Nothing, except the knowledge that once we crossed this line, there would be no turning back. Her body pressed into mine, trembling like a storm she could no longer contain. I felt the weight of every unspoken word between us, years of buried glances, every suppressed breath finally clawing its way to the surface. Claire, my voice cracked against her hair. We can't. But even as I said it, my hands refused to let her go. They held her as if the very act of release would undo me completely. She pulled back just enough to look at me. The porch light caught the tears clinging to her lashes. Tell me you don't feel it. Tell me this doesn't keep you awake at night, too. Her words cut through me. Because I couldn't tell her that. Not when every fiber of my being burned for her. Not when I'd spent endless nights haunted by the memory of her laugh, the softness of her hand brushing mine when no one else was watching. I didn't answer. And in my silence, she found her truth. Her lips hovered dangerously close, her breath hot against my cheek. For one wild, impossible heartbeat, I thought she would kiss me. But then she stopped. Claire pulled away, clutching her chest like she was afraid her heart might burst. She stumbled back a step, shaking her head violently. No, not like this. Her voice broke. If I do this now, I'll never forgive myself. And I'll ruin you in the process. She turned so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined her. But the gravel crunch beneath her boots told me she was real, that this moment had carved itself into both of us forever. I stood frozen on that porch, the night swallowing me whole. The swing rocked gently in the breeze, mocking me with its emptiness. She had come so close, so dangerously close, and yet we were still on opposite sides of a line neither of us dared to erase. And as her shadow disappeared into the dark, I realized something that shook me to my core. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Sleep never came that night. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the worn wooden floorboards, hearing echoes of her voice in the silence. If I do this now, I'll never forgive myself. And I'll ruin you in the process. The words clung to me like a second skin. By morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. My hands shook as I pulled on my jacket, stepped into the biting air, and walked the half-mile stretch to her house. Each step felt like defiance, against reason, against the years of restraint, against the life she had built with someone else. Her porch light was still on when I arrived, as if she, too, hadn't slept. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door, debating whether to knock. My chest pounded like it might split open. Finally, I rapped my knuckles against the wood. Soft. Hesitant. The door creaked open, and there she was, eyes red, hair undone, wearing the same cardigan from last night. For a second, she just stared at me, her lips parting in surprise, then pressing shut like she was swallowing words she couldn't afford to say. Micah, she whispered, like my name was both a prayer and a warning. I should have apologized. I should have made up some excuse, like I came to return something, or that I was worried about her. But the truth tumbled out before I could stop it. I can't keep pretending, I said. Not after last night. Not after the way you looked at me. Her eyes glistened, and I knew she felt the same. She leaned against the doorframe, as if the weight of everything between us was too heavy to hold alone. You think I don't want this? She asked, her voice sharp, cracking. God, Micah? I dream about it. About you. Every day I wake up beside a man who has no idea that I'm. She cut herself off, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood. The silence between us pulsed, alive and dangerous. Finally, she reached out and brushed the back of her hand against mine, the gentlest touch, yet it sent a wildfire racing through me. Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper. Tell me this is madness. Tell me to stop before I can't anymore. And I couldn't. Her hand lingered on mine, trembling, like a secret she had been waiting years to release. My chest rose and fell, desperate, my body leaning toward hers though my mind screamed for restraint. Then, the faint crunch of tires on gravel. Claire's eyes widened, and she snatched her hand back as if burned. The glow of headlights washed across the yard, throwing shadows over the porch. A truck door slammed shut, heavy and final. "My God," she whispered, panic flickering across her face. Her husband. The world seemed to shrink in on itself. My pulse hammered so loudly I swore he'd hear it from the driveway. I stumbled back a step, searching for escape, but the porch boards groaned underfoot, betraying me. Claire grabbed my wrist, pulling me closer to the doorway, her breath frantic against my ear. "Go through the side." "No. Please." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stand my ground, to let the truth explode into the open, no matter the cost. But the terror in her eyes rooted me to silence. She wasn't ready, not for this. So I slipped down the side steps just as the front door opened. I crouched low, pressing myself against the siding, the night air burning in my lungs. From the front of the house, I heard his voice. Rough. Tired. Oblivious. "Claire? You up? Long day at the shop. Thought I'd find you asleep already." I risked a glance. Through the half-open door, I caught sight of her, smiling, steady, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't been there moments ago, stealing the air she breathed. And it gutted me, because that smile wasn't for him. It was armor. I slipped into the shadows, heart racing, guilt gnawing at me, desire burning hotter than ever. Each step away from her house felt like betrayal. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The night swallowed me whole as I walked away from her house, every step heavy, every breath ragged. I didn't dare look back, though my heart begged me to. Behind those walls, Claire had slipped back into her practiced role, the dutiful wife, the calm voice, the steady hands. But I knew what had been there just minutes before. I had felt it, trembling between our palms, rising in her breath. When I finally reached my cabin, I shut the door and leaned hard against it, as if keeping out ghosts. The silence pressed in on me, broken only by the hammer of my pulse. My hands still remembered hers. My skin still burned where she had clutched me. I dropped onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. What the hell am I doing? It should have ended there. I told myself that. She had a husband. She had a family. I was nothing but a shadow from her past, a boy who once meant something, now grown into a man who should have known better. But lying to myself didn't help. Because the truth was simple and savage, I wanted her. Not in the careless way of youth, but in the way a man longs for the one thing he cannot have, the one thing that could undo him completely. Sleep never came that night. When dawn finally broke, pale and thin, I forced myself out onto the porch. The mountains stood silent, indifferent, as if mocking me. I told myself I'd bury it, let the night before vanish into memory like smoke. And then, a car door closed outside. I froze. Through the trees, I saw her. Claire. Walking up the path, a shawl pulled around her shoulders, her hair still tangled from sleep. Her eyes found mine across the distance, unflinching, carrying both fear and fire. She had come to me, and in that moment, I knew we were past the point of no return. She didn't wait for me to open the door. Claire pushed past me, her breath uneven, her hands shaking as she pulled the shawl tighter around her. The early morning light spilled into the cabin, catching the rawness in her eyes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence pressed between us like a living thing, thick with everything we had left unsaid. I wanted to ask her why she was here, why she had risked being seen, but my throat locked. Finally, she whispered, "I couldn't stay there. Not after last night." Her words slammed into me, as heavy as any confession I'd ever heard. She stood in the center of the room, staring at me as though daring me to push her away. But I didn't. I couldn't. "Claire," I managed, my voice breaking. "If we keep doing this, there's no going back." She let out a bitter, trembling laugh. "Going back? Micah, I've been living in going back for years. Pretending. Smiling. Surviving. Her eyes burned into mine. Last night was the first time I felt alive. Don't ask me to bury that. Her honesty cut through every layer of restraint I had built. All the rules, the reasons, the walls. They collapsed beneath the weight of her truth. Before I could reply, she stepped closer. So close I could smell the faint trace of soap on her skin, the warmth of her body fighting off the morning chill. She reached up, her hand trembling as it hovered near my face, waiting for permission. I didn't move away. When her fingers brushed my jaw, something inside me broke open. My arms went around her without thought, pulling her against me. She melted into the embrace with a desperate sound, half sob, half sigh. The world outside could have ended in that moment and I wouldn't have cared. Because for the first time in years, neither of us was pretending. Her breath warmed against my chest, uneven and urgent. I could feel the rapid beat of her heart, a frantic rhythm that echoed my own. For a fleeting moment, I thought she might pull away, come to her senses, and retreat into the life she had been guarding so tightly. But she didn't. Instead, Claire clung to me harder, her fingers digging into the fabric of my shirt like she was afraid I might vanish if she let go. Her voice was muffled against me, trembling with raw honesty. "I don't care if it's wrong," she whispered. I need this. I need you." The weight of her words nearly crushed me. Every instinct screamed at me to remind her of the cost, of the chaos that would follow if anyone ever knew. But the truth was, I needed it too. I needed her. I tilted her chin up, forcing her eyes to meet mine. There was no hesitation there, no veil of propriety or polite distance. Just fire, burning, reckless, undeniable. "You know this changes everything," I said softly. "Good." She shot back, her lips trembling into something between defiance and desperation. "Let it change." The storm that had been gathering between us for years finally broke. I kissed her, not gently, not cautiously, but with the kind of hunger born of years of silence and restraint. She responded like she had been waiting all along, her hands tangling in my hair, pulling me closer, erasing every last inch of distance. When we finally broke apart, both of us gasping for air, the reality of what we had done hovered like a shadow at the edge of the room. But neither of us spoke it aloud. Not yet. For that morning, the cabin became its own world, sealed off from consequence. A fragile sanctuary where the rest of the town, the lies, the risks, none of it existed. Claire's head rested against my shoulder, her voice a whisper meant only for me. "Promise me, Micah, even if the world finds out, even if it all falls apart, promise me you won't regret this." I closed my eyes, knowing the weight of that vow. "I won't," I whispered back. "Not for a second." And in that quiet, dangerous confession, we crossed the point of no return. The morning light spilled through the thin curtains, soft but merciless. It stripped away the safety of night, laying bare everything we had done. I watched Claire gather her things in silence, her fingers trembling as she buttoned her coat. There was no regret in her eyes, but there was fear, heavy and unspoken. Neither of us dared to talk about what last night meant in the long run. It was too big, too dangerous, and saying it aloud would make it real. Instead, I walked her to the door of the cabin, my hand brushing hers in a quiet promise that we weren't finished. She hesitated at the threshold, her breath visible in the cold air. "We'll talk soon," she whispered, though both of us knew soon carried 1,000 risks. I nodded, watching as she stepped outside and disappeared down the narrow road toward town. But we weren't alone. As I stood in the doorway, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. An old truck idled at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the trees. Inside sat Hank Miller, the kind of man who noticed everything and talked twice as much. His weathered face was partly hidden by the brim of his cap, but I saw the way his eyes tracked Claire, narrowing with suspicion. A chill crawled down my spine. If Hank had seen her leave my cabin at dawn, rumors would spread faster than wildfire. And in a town like ours, whispers were as good as truths. I closed the door slowly, leaning against the wood as dread coiled in my chest. Last night had been a secret only the two of us shared. But now the first crack had formed. By the time I sat back on the couch, the lingering scent of her still on my shirt, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Our sanctuary was already unraveling. The day moved slower than usual, every hour weighed down by the memory of Hank's truck. I couldn't shake the image of him sitting there, watching, calculating. Hank wasn't cruel by nature, but he thrived on being the keeper of secrets, the one who always knew more than he should. By late afternoon, I walked into town for supplies, hoping the routine would steady me. The grocery store was nearly empty, its fluorescent lights humming softly. But then I felt it, eyes on me. I turned, and there was Hank, leaning on the counter near the register, chatting idly with the clerk. When our gazes met, he gave me the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile at all. It was a warning. He tipped the brim of his cap, slow and deliberate, before walking out without another word. The air in my lungs turned heavy. He hadn't said anything, but silence could be louder than words. That evening Claire called. Her voice was tight, low, almost shaking. "Someone saw me this morning," she said, no introduction needed. I could feel it. "I don't know who, but—" "Hank," I whispered, my hand tightening around the phone. Her breath caught. The silence on the line stretched long, broken only by the faint static. "If he tells anyone, Micah, everything falls apart. My family, my work, everything." I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead against the cool wall. He hasn't spoken yet, but he will. He always does. The truth hung between us like a storm cloud. We had stolen one night for ourselves, but in a place like this, even one night was too loud to stay hidden. When I finally hung up, the cabin felt smaller than ever. Every creak of the wood, every whisper of wind outside carried the same unshakable message. We were running out of time. The Pine Hollow Tavern was the kind of place where rumors grew legs. One careless word could travel faster than a forest fire, and Hank knew it. He sat at his usual stool, beer in hand, the jukebox humming an old country tune in the background. I walked in late that night, mostly because I couldn't stand the silence of the cabin. But the moment I stepped through the door, I felt the shift in the air. Conversations dipped low, laughter faltered. Hank's voice carried above the murmur, calm, almost too calm. "Funny thing," he drawled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "This town's been quieter than usual, but sometimes quiet hides something else. Something folks don't want seen." The men around him chuckled uneasily, waiting for him to land his point. He didn't. He just leaned back, eyes scanning the room, until they landed squarely on me. "Take Micah here," he added, his tone dripping with implication. "Man's been spending a whole lot of time up on that mountain. And he ain't always alone." The words cut sharper than a knife. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay still. If I reacted, I'd only prove him right. Someone at the bar laughed nervously. "You saying he's got company up there?" Hank smirked, slow and deliberate. "I'm not saying anything. Just, folks ought to keep their eyes open." A silence fell heavier than the smoke curling above the tables. Everyone was watching me now, waiting. I gave a tight nod, moved to a corner table, and sat down. My throat was dry, my chest tight. Hank didn't need to say her name. He'd already planted the seed. By the time I left, the whispers had started. And I knew one thing for certain. Secrets don't survive long in Pine Hollow. It didn't take long for Hank's words to travel. Pine Hollow was a small town, and whispers had a way of curling around fences, slipping through cracked doors, and landing on ears that weren't meant to hear them. Claire heard it on a gray morning, while she was picking up groceries at Mrs. Callahan's store. She had gone in quietly, her scarf pulled up high, hoping to keep her presence unnoticed. But small towns never let you stay invisible. Two women stood near the flower aisle, their voices hushed but sharp enough to cut through the air. "Up on that mountain with him, can you imagine?" one whispered. "Lord, I always thought she was too good for her husband, but sneaking around like that? And with Micah Dempsey of all people," the other replied. Claire froze. The can of beans in her hand slipped, clattering onto the wooden floor. Both women turned, their eyes widening slightly, then darting away with guilty smirks. Heat rushed to Claire's face. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she bent down to pick up the can. She forced herself to straighten, to walk calmly to the counter. Mrs. Callahan gave her a look, soft, almost pitying, but said nothing. That silence felt heavier than words. By the time Claire stepped outside, her hands were trembling. She sat in her car, staring at the wheel, trying to breathe. The world outside felt too loud, every glance too knowing. That night at the cabin, she barely touched her dinner. Micah noticed, of course. He always noticed. "You're quiet tonight," he said, watching her from across the table. She lifted her eyes to his, and for the first time since she'd returned to Pine Hollow, there was distance in them. "They're talking about us, Micah," she whispered. "Everyone knows." The words cracked something fragile in the room. The warmth they had fought so hard to build was suddenly laced with fear. And beneath that fear was something Claire hadn't dared name yet: shame. The silence between them stretched long into the night. The days after the whispers reached her were different. Claire moved through the cabin like a ghost, her footsteps softer, her laughter absent. She no longer lingered near Micah when he chopped wood outside or when he read by the fire. Instead, she kept herself busy with chores that didn't need doing, folding laundry twice, scrubbing counters that were already clean, pretending her hands weren't shaking. Micah noticed, of course. He always did. He tried to reach for her, sometimes just with a question, sometimes with his hand on hers, but each time, Claire found a way to slip away. A faint excuse, a tired smile, a sudden interest in something across the room. At night, the distance became unbearable. Where once she had rested against him, finding comfort in the rise and fall of his chest, now she turned her back, staring into the shadows until her eyes stung. Micah lay awake behind her, silent, his breath steady but heavy with what he wasn't saying. Inside Claire's heart, a storm raged. She told herself it wasn't because she regretted Micah. It was the world she regretted. The voices in the store. The judgment in Mrs. Callahan's eyes. The shame that didn't belong to her but clung to her skin anyway. She had spent years building a life of control, of appearances, and now it felt as though the walls she had carefully constructed were cracking wide open. One evening, as they stood on the porch watching the sun dip behind the mountains, Micah finally broke the silence. "You're pulling away from me," he said softly. Claire's throat tightened. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if to hold in the pieces that were breaking. "I don't know how to carry this, Micah," she admitted, her voice trembling. "The looks, the whispers, it's too much. I can't breathe when I think about it. Maybe we made a mistake." The words hung between them like cold smoke. Micah's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue, not yet. He only looked at her, his eyes filled with something between hurt and determination, as if he were silently begging her not to let go. But Claire couldn't meet his gaze. She turned away, watching the last light disappear, feeling as though her own had gone with it. Micah had always been quiet, steady as the pines that lined the ridge. But that night, after Claire whispered about mistakes and turned from him, something inside him snapped. "No," he said, his voice low but cutting through the hush of the porch. Claire froze. She had expected his silence, his usual patience, but not this. Micah stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wood, his chest rising as if he carried the whole weight of the mountain inside him. "Don't you dare call what we have a mistake." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting anywhere but his. "Micah, please." "No, Claire," he interrupted, his voice breaking for the first time. "You think I don't hear them too? You think I don't see the way they look at us? I do. Every single day. But I don't care." His hand reached for hers, not gently this time, but with a grip that trembled from fear of losing her. "I've lost too much in this life. My father, my mother, the years that could have been different. But I will not lose you because of their whispers. I won't let them take you from me." Claire's chest ached. She wanted to believe him, wanted to sink into his defiance, but fear still coiled around her ribs. "You don't understand." "I do," Micah said firmly, his gaze fierce and unwavering. "I understand that you're scared. I understand that the world is cruel. But, Claire," his voice softened, cracked, "don't punish us for their poison. Don't walk away when all I've ever done is fight for you." Tears burned in her eyes. For the first time, she saw Micah not as the quiet, steady boy she had once known, but as a man ready to stand against everything, even her own doubts, if it meant keeping her. Look at me, he pleaded. And when she finally did, she saw the raw truth in him, a devotion that terrified her as much as it saved her. The silence stretched, heavy and trembling, until Claire whispered, "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Micah leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "Then let me be strong for both of us." The night was heavy with silence. Not the kind that comforts, but the kind that lingers like a shadow on the edge of every breath. Claire sat by the window of her small apartment, the faint glow of the street light washing her in pale gold. Outside, the world kept moving, cars passing, people laughing in the distance. But inside, she felt like time had folded in on itself. She thought about Micah. His voice, rough with desperation the last time they spoke, still echoed in her memory. "I don't care what they say, Claire. I don't care what it costs me. I'm not walking away from you." The words should have anchored her. Instead, they left her trembling. Because she knew what it meant. He was willing to burn everything for her, his reputation, his fragile place in the town, maybe even himself. And she wasn't sure if love was supposed to ask for that much sacrifice. Claire pressed her forehead against the cool glass. The rumors had cut her deeper than she wanted to admit. Neighbors who once smiled now whispered. Old friends crossed the street instead of meeting her eyes. And though she told herself it didn't matter, it had changed something inside her. She had started to shrink back into herself, hiding pieces of her heart, even from him. But Micah, he refused to retreat. Every look, every word from him had carried the weight of a man standing against a storm. She admired that. She loved him for it. And yet, she feared it too. A knock startled her from the silence. 3 short raps against the door. Her chest tightened. She didn't need to look to know who it was. She opened the door anyway. Micah stood there, his face tired but his eyes burning with the same stubborn fire. The night clung to him, dusting his jacket with the scent of wind and wood smoke. For a moment, neither spoke. The distance between them was only a few steps, but it felt like miles of unspoken fear and longing. Finally, he broke the silence. His voice was low, almost a plea. "Claire, tell me you still want this. Tell me you still want us." Her throat tightened. She wanted to reach for him, to fall into the safety of his arms, to believe that love could be enough to silence a world that thrived on cruelty. But she couldn't lie, not to him, not to herself. "I want you, Micah," she whispered, tears burning her eyes. "But I'm scared. I don't know if I can survive what this town is turning me into." He stepped closer, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. The air between them pulsed with everything they couldn't say. "Then let me carry it with you," he said softly. "Let me fight for you, even when you're too tired to fight for yourself." For the first time in weeks, Claire let herself breathe. She didn't know if they would win, or if the town's shadows would always hang over them. But in that moment, standing in the fragile space between surrender and defiance, she felt the truth settle into her bones. Love wasn't about certainty. It was about choosing again and again, even when the world tried to tear it apart. She reached for his hand at last, their fingers tangling in a grip both desperate and tender. And as the night stretched long and uncertain around them, Claire realized that maybe, just maybe, the real confession was not in the words they spoke, but in the choice to hold on when letting go would have been easier.